Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Was Cursed with a Triad Bond? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Having two soulmates was incredible rare. Some believed it to be a genetic condition, and maybe they weren't so wrong with that assumption. He knew of 3 people in his family alone that had multiple soulmates. He was one of them himself, but there was an issue in all of those cases. There was no known case where the 2 soulmates of one person were also soulmates to each other, which had ended rather bad in a lot of cases of attempted murder, attempted kidnapping, things along the lines of that. Shudo hoped it wouldn't be like this in his case. He hoped that his soulmates would form a bond between themselves over time. He didn't want to end up like his mother. Her actual soulmates had ended up murdering each other when they had still been in their late teens. Maybe it would be the best for everyone if he never met his soulmates. Really, they would be better off without him, not like his father would ever really leave him alone. But he hadn't expected to meet both of them on his first day at UA, and he hadn't accepted both of them to already know each other. Even though know was probably not the right word. At first, he hadn't even noticed it. Shudo had arrived early and sat down immediately. He had been just waiting for the teacher to arrive. There was a red, or in his case 2 red strings attached to his left ring finger with a knot. He and each of his soulmates were the only ones able to see them, though he was the only one able to see both of them. He didn't even pay any mind to it at first. There was yelling, loud talking, other students arriving, stuff like that. It didn't really matter. But then there had been a tug at his left ring finger and someone had smashed their hand against the top of his desk, creating an explosion while doing so. Luckily his desk didn't break and nothing else seemed to suffer from the blast. "Hey, half and half," the angry blonde yelled. Shudo looked at the hand, or rather at the red string that connected the boy with him, before he lifted his eyes. His whole posture was screaming anger management issues. Oh, and he was obviously one of Shudo's soulmates. His father would like this for sure. Yes, Shudo asked. He wasn't going to show anyone, and surely not this guy, that he hated people yelling at him. It wasn't that much of a problem when it were villains, but his dad and one of his soulmates on the other hand, it seemed more personal, more hurtful. "I just hope the universe didn't give me a weak but soulmate, then I am going to punch that fucker in the face. Could he please stop yelling for a moment? I can assure you that I am not weak, but the teacher should arrive every minute and you should sit down again," the dual quirk user said. "Effing you not. We are legally allowed to spend the day we meet together," some sheet with the whole soul bond thing. "So shitty hair, tell the teacher that me and half are going to soul bond now," or something like that. His soulmate, whom he still didn't know the name of, yelled, "I am legally obliged to allow this, but you 2 are going to do the physical exam tomorrow and everyone else get dressed and to the sports fields," the teacher said. Was the man literally standing in front of the class in a sleeping bag? "Apologies, sensei, but there might be a problem," someone said. It was a boy with green hair, green eyes and freckles, and it took Shudo only a second to notice what the problem was. How likely was it that both of his soulmates were in the same class as him? This was a goddamn nightmare. "It's Aizawa Shoyuta for all of you. What is the problem? I would really like to go on with the lesson." The teacher looked tired and was wearing a jumpsuit as he climbed out of the sleeping bag. Was the man even an actual teacher? The boy, with the half red and half white hair, "Sorry, I don't know your name. He is also my soulmate." He seemed to be quite unsure about what he was saying and also scared. Why would you be scared when you found your soulmate? Did this boy think that he was as brash as Endeavor? No, he wasn't looking at Shudo, he was looking at the blonde. Did they already know each other? "Is that correct?" the teacher asked. "Yes, sir, I have 2 soulmates, 2 strings, and none of the 2 is lying," Shudo said as he wanted to clear the situation. The teacher sighed louder and rubbed his hand over his forehead. Shoyuta was way too tired for this, and it was only the first day. He knew what could happen to someone who had multiple soulmates. There had been 1 or 2 cases in UA, never in their first year thought, and most of them didn't end well for any party. So, he needed to tell Nedzu what happened and get those 3 out of his classroom for now. He didn't want to deal with this. There were differences in soul bonds. Everyone automatically felt a deep connection towards their soulmate, but in a few cases, it got out of control and those people became, let's just say, very protective, which could be dealt with, mildly possessive or even completely obsessed with a person. He wasn't going to name certain things such a person could turn into, but let's just say that most of those words had something to do with murder. It only happened in 0.001% if you only had one soulmate, but if you had two then, well, it was something closer to 80%. Not that he would really show it, but show Yuta cared about his students. As for the rapid rise in cases where the victim, it was always the victim, had two separate soulmates, people suspected it had something to do with the fact that soulmates were supposed to be a human destined for you. No one really wants to share that with a third. It also wasn't such a big issue since only around 0.00034% of the population had multiple soulmates. But he still didn't want any of his students to die at the age of 15 to 16 because of a goddamn red string that no one except them could even see. The first step to do so was get those three. One of them was the child of endeavor, which meant a very long phone call later, out of the room to stop other people from freaking out. Because a few were already cooing over the situation and calling it cute. Endeavor's kid looked everything but comfortable and the blonde one glared at the greenette like he was about to rip his head off any second. Problem child 1, 2, and 3, would you please leave the room? You won't have any school today, do something together but please not on UA grounds. I am going to inform your parents, he stated. I am going to kill you, stupid Deku, Katsuki Bakugo yelled, and there was explosions around his hands. Sho Yuta erased his quirk before anything bad could happen. Out all three of you, he ordered. The problem child, the boy with the green hair, mumbled something that sounded an awful lot like his hero name and something about quirks. The youngest Todoroki just grabbed his bag and left the room with a neutral expression on his face. Bakugo threw his stuff out the door and then went after it, cursing everything and everyone he knew. Izuku Midoriya was scribbling something down in a notebook as he left. That was surely an interesting trio of problem children. This was going to be a long day. The rest of Class 1A was staring at him. Didn't I tell you something? Get changed and we'll meet on the sports field. I don't have the whole day, he told them. They left UA without anyone getting injured. Shudo was very relieved about this, but he wouldn't take it for granted. There definitely was some thick air between the other two. This is the worst thing that could have. It happened, you shitty quirkless Deku. There it was again. Shudo sent out a wall of ice that built itself between the two so that no one would get hurt. The angry blonde was throwing explosions against the ground, sky, and ice. An ice quirk, what are the boundaries of it? Can you make a whole glacier? Does it cool your body down and cause harm if you use it too much? Is it the only thing you can do? Do the two hair colors mean something, or are they just there to look pretty, or? Shudo wasn't able to understand the rest. The greenette was mumbling a lot, and that very fast. It was a lot to take in, and he tried to listen to it, but it wasn't possible, and he also couldn't just ignore it. After all, that was one of his soulmates talking, even if the circumstances of the meeting hadn't been the best. Someone shook his shoulders hard, and it snapped him out of whatever that had been. I think you broke him, shitty Deku, the blonde snapped. I am sorry, Kaken. Shudo blinked and then looked at the two. Maybe he should just do the most logical think. No one had introduced himself yet. My name is Shudo Todoroki. It is nice to meet you, he said, trying to distract the angry one from the possibility of murdering the other. Maybe he was already messing this up. Katsuki Bakugo, the angry blonde, introduced himself. The green-haired boy was still mumbling something, this time about fire quirks and pro-heroes. Shudo wasn't sure that he had heard everything right. Izuku Midoriya, he told him a second later. Katsuki and Izuku, he should be able to remember that. The names weren't too difficult, and what kind of person would he be if he couldn't even remember the names of his soulmates? This is some stupid bullshit. Why do I need to share my soulmate with shitty Deku? Could he please stop yelling for a moment? This reminded him too much of his father. Please calm down, Kaken, this is no one's fault, Izuku said. His voice was so much softer and calmer, such a contrast to Katsuki's. Shudo stepped from one foot to the other and rubbed his palms together. This day surely wasn't going to be quiet or calm in any way possible. It would be a wonder if no one got injured. At the moment he only had a few scratches and bruises. His father had been gentle yesterday. Normally, the first step would be spend the day together or visit our homes and introduce Shudo to my mom and your parents. Oh my god, we are going to meet Endeavor. And Izuku was talking way too fast again. And oh god, Shudo hadn't even thought about it before, but they were going to meet his father soon, and Shudo wasn't going to lie to them. Everyone was going to believe Endeavor over him. His soulmates wouldn't be the exception, and he wasn't going to get his hopes up just for them to come crashing down on him later. He could live with this. He had lived with this for years, and he could go on like this. It wasn't going to kill him. It was fine. He hadn't noticed that the two had already resumed their talk. Well, Katsuki was yelling and Izuku was apologizing and stumbling over his own words. He couldn't really call that a talk. I would like to meet Izuku's mother first if that is all right, Shudo said. They were on a train, on their way to Izuku's place. Both of his soulmates had turned out to be practically neighbors, but he lived further away and it took about an hour to get from UA to the apartment complex. Izuku was writing something down in a notebook. Katsuki was complaining loudly about the whole issue and he himself was listening to music through earbuds. Shudo was sitting across from the two and looked at the strings attached to his fingers. He wasn't able to change fate, no one was, and he feared that someone might get hurt in the near future because of him. Hey, half and half, he heard Katsuki yell over the sound of the music. Shudo paused the song he was listening to and pulled the earbuds out of his ears, putting them into the pocket of his school uniform's jacket. What is the issue, Katsuki? He asked. The teen smashed his fist against the wall of the train and it shook. Shudo feared that it might fall over, but luckily nothing happened. How had he managed to get into UA with such a temper? But if he thought about it harder, it made sense. His father still was the number 2 hero after all that he had done. The issue is that you are our soulmate and you don't talk to us. You didn't tell us anything about yourself, and shitty Deku also isn't any better. Stop writing useless CRP down and just tell him something stupid about yourself that no one cares about. Shudo pressed his back harder against the seat and curled his hand into fists, scraping the fabric of his breathes in the process. He wasn't scared, he was just worried, and maybe fear had a tiny bit to do with his reaction, but it wasn't the main cause. I don't know what to talk about, Shudo said. It wasn't a full lie but also far from the truth, and he didn't want to lie to them, but if there was a possibility to cut ties or make sure that this situation didn't got out if a control, then it was better if they weren't closer to him than they needed to be. For their own good. Hobbies, friends, family, normal stuff. Just tell us something about yourself, Katsuki told him. Shudo still didn't say a thing. What could he tell them without lying or saying something wrong? If he slipped up, and Endeavor would surely find out. If he did, then he would get even more hurt for giving his old man a bad reputation. Shudo didn't want any new broken bones in the next few weeks if it was possible. Endeavor definitely wouldn't be happy about all of this. Shudo missed his first day at UA, and the number 2 her would probably see this an insult even if it wasn't Shudo's fault. I don't have any siblings. Kaken is also an only child, Izuku said. I have a brother and a sister, Shudo answered. He didn't mention Tuya. No one did if they didn't want Endeavor's wrath turned towards them. Even saying the name of their dead oldest sibling would end in a few bruises at least and broken ribs and burned skin at most. Can we meet them? I mean, I don't want to seem impolite, but shouldn't we meet them soon? We are soulmates. Isn't that what we are supposed to do? Izuku asked. He had closed the notebook but marked the page he had been on with the pen. Shudo looked at him. The boy was smiling, and he would be lying if he said that it didn't look adorable with all those freckles on his face and this smile, and Shudo should really stop thinking about it for his own good. Give him a second to breath, Deku, Katsuki yelled. I don't want you to break his FNG brain because you won't shut up for a moment. We are gonna meet his FNG family at some point, but that isn't the matter now, you stupid moron. He is going to meet your mom first, and I'll accept that, but only if you shut that your trap, because I don't want to lose my mind over your stupid mumbling. Shudo wasn't going to ask what sort of problem the two had, but they definitely had one. He wanted to ask. Deep down he wanted to know what the issue was so that he could try to fix it, but he also didn't want to make it worse. Because he would make it worse. Because his father would know what he had been up to, and that could only make everything worse. Because no matter how strong a quirk was, it would never be strong enough for his father, and it wasn't like Endeavor was going to accept this in any way. His soulmates were both male, which really wasn't a problem for Shudo. He wasn't particularly straight in any way but the old man, but Endeavor wanted him to have children, stronger, always just stronger and more powerful quirks. It didn't matter what he or his siblings wanted, what Tuya or their mother had wanted, it was always about Enji's wishes and ambitions. So Shudo didn't ask and instead fixated his eyes onto the notebook that Izuku was still holding. "What were you writing down?" Shudo asked. Izuku didn't answer, just pressed the book closer against his chest and red began to spread onto his cheeks. "It's nothing really, just some analysis, nothing you need to worry about," he stuttered out. Katsuki pulled the notebook out of his hands and opened it on the marked page. The pen fell onto the floor. The blonde looked at the page for a few seconds before he threw the whole thing at Shudo, who was able to catch it, but the dual quirk user didn't look at it and just handed the book back to its owner. He wasn't going to invade anyone's privacy like that, he wasn't his father. "Really, you didn't even take a look half and half? That idiot was literally sketching your face in there, looked stupid by the way," Katsuki said. Izuku had done what now? Why would anyone sketch him? There was no benefit from doing so and he really wasn't even that interesting. Maybe the scar was difficult to draw or something like that? Yes, it must have been that just an exercise to better one's artistic abilities. "I am sure it looked good," Shudo spoke. Izuku beamed at him and it was still one of the most adorable smiles he had ever seen. He forced his lips into a tight smile and pulled the earbuds out of his pocket again. They weren't even close to their destination yet and would still need to spend around 20 minutes on the train before they got off. He wouldn't be able to hold a conversation for that long without slipping up. He didn't want anyone else to get hurt because of him. Katsuki, though, seemed to have a different plan. He stood up, walked 2 steps forwards, and let himself fall onto the seat to Shudo's left side. Then he snatched one of the earbuds from him. "Let me hear what sheet you are even listening to half and half." For once Katsuki Bakugo wasn't yelling. "All right." Shudo slightly raised an eyebrow as he unpaused the song he had been listening to before he had been forced to talk with them. Not that he himself minded it, his heart surely didn't seem to find any possible negatives in this situation. His brain, on the other hand, not so much. Hopefully the press wouldn't catch wind of this, that would be more than just bad. His family had enough problems with paparazzi already, the media didn't need another reason to bombard them with questions. The next thing was Katsuki took was his phone. The blonde began to scroll trough the music app and shook his head in disbelief. "You seemingly have all existing streaming services on this and you still listen to crappy shit." Shudo didn't reply to this and just put the earbud he still had in his left ear. Maybe it would help protect his hearing from a certain screaming soulmate of his. The blonde chose another song. After what felt like hours, by the way, how could anyone need that long to chose a simple part of musical art, and started it. To Shudo's surprise, it wasn't some sort of rock or metal, it was pop, something that he may have heard before if he had used an actual radio. Which he had, but that was just a long time ago. How else was he supposed to do something against his father? Shudo simply came to the conclusion that spending his old man's money was the only thing he could do without risking bad injuries. Endeavor would be angry, but not too angry. It was perfect and he was able to live like this and he was fine. It was fine, his family situation was fine and he wasn't going to tell anyone anything else. But the music actually kind of good. So good that he barely noticed that Izuku had gotten up from his seat and sat down on the seat to his right. "Can I listen too?" he asked. "There are only 2 earbuds here, nerd. What would you be listening on? We can't just blast music through the train, shitty Deku." Shudo was about to say something before Izuku replied instead. "But we can SWH, there shouldn't be a problem, right?" "I'll tell you where the problem is, nerd. I am not going to SW anything with you. Kaken, please, we are both his soulmates, we need to be civil to each other or we'll end up like the other 80%, you don't want that, do you?" "Wait. Because we are in the 20% where no one gets crazy over anything. I am not going to compete with you, Deku. Just don't drag him in some stupid sheet of yours and get him killed, because then that won't end well for you either, and bringing soulmates into the argument from the very start. Oh, so mature of you, Deku." "I am sorry, Kaken. I just don't want any of us to end up dead." "Guys," Shudo said. They hadn't heard him or had just decided to ignore him. "How did you even get into UA, you quirkless nerd? How the F did we end up sharing a goddamn soulmate too?" "I am not quirkless, Kaken. Mine just manifested late in live. There is no reason to bring this up anymore, and do you know what kind of things you are giving off right now? Not good ones." You are going to scare him off. He is also my soulmate if a nerd. I am not stupid and don't act like you are any better Deku. You are like a leech. I wouldn't be surprised if you would be the one losing your mind. Shudo would like to add that at the beginning this argument had been about earbuds. How could that have turned into this? The dual quirk user sighed as he reached into his school bag and opened his mouth to say something. I have 3 pairs of earbuds. The Midoriya's apartment was rather small and maybe even smaller than the training room in his home. Shudo wasn't 100% about this. But it was more lived in, more comfortable and nicer. Oh, and Katsuki was respectful and calm and helpful and nice and nothing like he had been a few minutes ago, and he was even calling Izuku's mother auntie. So, he and Izuku most likely knew each other since a very long time, maybe since they were toddlers. Then why were they not friends anymore? Shudo wasn't going to ask. Oh, and one thing, Inko Midoriya was one of the sweetest people he had ever met. Izuku. Shudo was, well, hot wouldn't be a good way to describe him. Izuku would say himself that appealing wasn't enough. His soulmate was breathtaking, maybe even more than that, and his adorable hair. No, Shudo was also cute. Not that Izuku would ever say it out loud, but how could anyone be that cute? It was abundantly clear that the greenette was already head over heels for his soulmate, but who wouldn't be? Izuku wanted to hug him, not kiss him. He wasn't stupid enough to think that Shudo would be happy about that just now, but hugs had never hurt anyone. Izuku wasn't going to do it at the moment, but his soulmate looked like he needed a hug, like he needed over 1,000 hugs, and Izuku wanted to give him all of them. They were sitting in his living room in an uncomfortable silence. Shudo was scrolling through something on his phone, which by the way looked like it had costed more than a month's rent of their apartment. Yes, the Todorokis were rich, really rich, and that didn't surprise anyone, but Shudo didn't seem like someone who would normally show it off like that. But Kaken's reaction was a bit over the top, and because his childhood friend snatched the dual quirk user's phone out of his hands and threw it against the wall, he would like to add that it was definitely broken after that. Kaken, you can't just dash, Izuku began. No, it's fine. My old man has enough money to probably buy the whole country a brand new phone. This won't be a problem for anyone, Shudo interrupted him. He didn't even seem to be bothered by it. But Izuku was sure that Shudo wasn't just some rich BSTRD, it wouldn't fit. Soulmates were meant for each other, and Shudo wouldn't be his soulmate if he was a bad person. He also knew that Katsuki knew it too, even if the other teen didn't show it. Having talked to us half and half, we are your goddamn soulmates, Kaken yelled. I'm sorry. Don't always say that. It's not like I would hit you or something like that. Well, maybe when we are sparring or at the sports festival, but not under normal circumstances. I am not FNG abuser. But what he had done had come pretty close to bullying a lot of times. I am not scared of you, Katsuki. His soulmate surely was good at a lot of things, but lying wasn't one of them. I know fear when I see it half and half. What are you so effing scared of? Is everything alright, Katsuki? I thought I heard yelling, Izuku's mother asked from the kitchen. Inko was making food for them, and it seemed like Katsuki had forgotten for a second where they actually were. No, everything is fine, Auntie, Kaken replied. In the time that had taken it Kaken to answer, Shudo had gotten up from the couch and had excused himself to go to the bathroom. Izuku knew that this could have ended worse, but it seemed like his childhood friend had been right. Shudo wasn't behaving like a normal person would in his situation, and the conversation had revealed that Katsuki had noticed it too. Izuku wanted to help. He wanted to help in every way that he could, but he didn't know how. He didn't know what or who was the cause of Shudo's behavior. He wasn't a psychologist or a doctor, and he didn't even know what all of this was pointing towards, what it was implying. But there needed to be a cause, and he would find it. Kaken, we need to talk, Izuku said. I ain't gonna talk to you, you FING nerd. I am only here because that extra is also my soulmate, he yelled back. Izuku didn't want to fall back on this, but he needed to have a normal conversation for this to work out, so Izuku really only had one possibility. Katsuki Bakugu, we need to talk. Kaken stopped for a second, then huffed and crossed his arms in front of his chest. About what? He asked calmly. So, it had worked again. Izuku forced himself to not smirk at that. Shudo, we need to talk about Shudo. Izuku cleared any leftover confusion up. I know that someone or something hurt him, but it doesn't look like you know how to help him either. We are his soulmates, we need to do something about this. We can't just stand by and watch him get even more broken. I am not blind, Deku. A normal person wouldn't act that closed off towards his soulmates. I want to kill whoever is responsible for this. I need to. We'll get to it, Kakin, but we need to figure out what has happened before we can do anything. If something or someone is still hurting him, then we'll figure out who. Don't kill anyone, you would go to prison. Shudo wouldn't like it, and we would just be added to the failed 80% statistic. We can let Endeavor deal with it. If it is a person, he would surely protect his son. He is the number 2 hero after all. Don't worry about it, Kakin. We just need to figure out the who or what it is. Izuku smiled a bit. They would figure it out. Neither he nor Kakin were stupid, and whatever or whoever it was that still hurt Shudo would pay for it dearly. Here, take a bit more. You don't need to be shy, Todoroki-kun, Inko said as she put more food onto Shudo's plate. Izuku was hiding a tiny smile while taking a bite. His mother was already mothering Shudo like he was her own son, which was normal considering that he was her only child's soulmate, but it still seemed to overwhelm the youngest Todoroki. Kakin was behaving like a normal person and had gotten a call from his parents around an hour ago. Mitsuki wasn't very happy that her son hadn't texted or called her immediately after he had found his soulmate. Izuku had heard the yelling loud and clearly, and he had been in another room. Please call me Shuto, the dual quirk user told her. Shudo was still tense, and it was obvious in the way he held himself. What if you tell us something about yourself? Inko asked. Izuku saw how Shudo froze, how his hands curled into the fabric of his breathes, and how the rise and fall of his chest got faster. There really isn't that much to tell. You know who my dad is. My sister is a teacher at an elementary school, and my brother goes to college in a different part of town. He isn't home a lot, Shudo answered. I asked about you, not your family, but it is still very nice that you have already opened up enough to talk with us about it. So, do you have any hobbies? Friends that it would be better for me to know because they might come over soon. Not that I want to pressure you into telling us anything, dear. I just didn't expect my son to meet his soulmate so soon, and it certainly is a surprise that Katsuki has the same one. Oh, and by the way, do you know when your parents will arrive, Katsuki? Mitsuki hasn't answered my text yet. They could be here every minute, but I don't know where they were when she called me, so I don't know it exactly. Shudo had began to pick at his food, and it seemed like he wasn't interested in the conversation anymore. Izuku wouldn't have that. Sho-chan, what do you like to do in your free time? He asked. Training, I guess, Shudo answered. I meant like a hobby. Playing a music instrument, or something like football or soccer. I don't really do anything like that. Alright, someone needs to get out of his home more often. You can't just do nothing except training, studying, and sleeping. That isn't healthy. Half and half, Kakin said. Shudo clutched the chopsticks he was holding tighter. I'll try to. It just isn't that easy most of the time. People usually don't like to leave my family alone for long periods of time. That's all. I'll try to get outside for more than just you, okay? Shudo replied. Kakin agreed unhappily. Izuku continued to eat his food. Shudo seemed to relax more over the next minutes. His soulmate seemed to be calmer when no one was talking or on Kakin's part yelling at him. He had noticed Shudo's scar before but hadn't paid much mind towards it. Maybe he had been born with it, or it just been an accident with his own quirk at a very young ago. Things like this happened, little kids using their quirks for the first time and accidentally harming themselves and others. It wasn't impossible that Shudo had been one of those kids. But something told Izuku that it wasn't the case. The scar was on the left side of his face, his hair was red there, and he knew that there was nothing to prove it, but as Shudo had created an ice wall after they had left UA, he had only used his right foot. Maybe it wasn't fire that had caused it? But Izuku wasn't sure, and so he didn't say anything. He continued to stare at Shudo for a moment before he turned his head around and looked at the clock that was placed on the wall. It was only 11:30. Someone knocked on the door what could only be a few minutes later. The knocking was accompanied by yelling. It took no one longer than a millisecond to figure out who was standing in front of the apartment door. Open the door, brat. I know that you are. Here. Kakin got up from where he had been sitting and walked towards the door. I'm coming. Stop yelling, you old hag. They had finished eating, so Izuku stood up himself and offered Shudo a hand. His soulmate didn't take it and just turned his eyes away from everyone as he began to follow Kakin. Izuku looked at his hand like it had betrayed him and just followed them with his mom. Shudo didn't hate him, right? He couldn't hate either of them. They were his soulmates. That meant something, right? He should stop thinking like this. Shudo was hurt, and as long as that was the case, it was no wonder that he didn't open up to them like a normal person would do. He was simply scared. Or what if he thought that they didn't like him, that Izuku didn't like him? No, that couldn't be it. Shudo knew what soulmates were. He knew that they would never leave him. Mitsuki was looking the dual quirk user up and down and continued to yell at her son while she talked to Shudo like a normal person at the same time, which led to a very confused Todoroki and an even angrier Kaken. "Get away from my FNG soulmate, old hag," Katsuki yelled. "Don't talk to me like that, brat," she yelled back. This went on for what felt like an eternity until Masaru managed calmed both of them down a bit and Mitsuki apologized to Inko. Izuku's mother just said that it would be fine and left them alone to make a few cups of tea. "So, I already heard that my son isn't your only soulmate. Serves the brat right if you ask me," Mitsuki said after she had turned toward Shudo. "I don't really think that fate meant it as a punished in any way. There are a lot of good people who had more than one soulmate," he answered. Izuku could finish the sentence in his mind, but for most of them it didn't end well. Kaken stepped between his mother and Shudo, and that was the exact moment that the kettle began to whistle and everything descended into total chaos. Shudo. Everything had been going well, but then he had messed it up. He wasn't a little child anymore. He shouldn't be scared of a tea kettle. His mind knew that this fear was unreasonable, but that didn't stop his body from ignoring just exactly that. Shudo couldn't breathe anymore. He wasn't able to. The air just didn't want into his lungs anymore. He couldn't breathe. He was going to suffocate. He was going to die here. He couldn't breathe. His hands desperately tried to grab for something and they curled around it. As soon as they got something between them, his fingers curled around it and refused to let go. The next thing he noticed were his legs giving out. Shudo fell to his knees, his hands still grabbing whatever fabric they could have reached. His chest was rising and falling way too fast, but he still couldn't breathe. Shudo felt a few fingers softly touch his forehead. They were warm, but not as warm as his left hand. It was comfortable and maybe even a bit calming, but not enough for him to be able to breathe again. He was still suffocating, which didn't make any sense. There was nothing stuck in his throat, nothing that could explain the reaction of his body. Everything was fine. He knew that Shudo wasn't stupid, but it didn't help. Nothing helped. Someone pulled him back to his feet and Shudo just grabbed the fabric tighter. After a few minutes he could breathe again. Shudo didn't know how long it had taken for him to calm down, but he was able to see again and could also recognize what exactly his fingers were curled into and who was running his fingers through the young Todoroki's hair. "What the F was that, half and half?" Katsuki yelled. It didn't seem that intimidating anymore because the explosive teenager that was still hugging him looked more concerned than angry. Though Shudo couldn't be sure, what if it was just an act? His father had been incredible nice and charming too before his mother had married him. After that it had changed, and not in a good way. Shudo couldn't fall for something like that too. He couldn't end up like his mother. But it still felt safe, maybe even too safe, but Shudo just leaned a bit more into the touch. Hurting him while witnesses were here wouldn't even be a good idea for his old man, so surely no one would try it here. Shudo still hadn't answered the question, but he also didn't plan to do so. "Hey, I asked you something," Katsuki said. Shudo still didn't reply. He just pressed his face further into the blonde's shirt. He couldn't just go up to them and tell them what had happened. It wasn't like anyone would believe it. The dual quirk user mumbled something incomprehensible. Shudo's eyes were closed, but he could still hear that people were talking about something. Someone put a blanket. He could feel that it was one around his shoulders, and he may have pulled it a bit closer around himself. "Shudo, is everything all right?" Izuku asked. Shudo stopped for a second. What was he even doing here? He pushed Katsuki away from him, careful to not injure the other, and took a few steps back. All of this had been caused by a whistling tea kettle. Maybe he actually had a problem. Not that he could get help for it or something like that. His father would never allow that. Shudo handed the really fluffy blanket back to Izuku and gave him a small smile. He couldn't allow himself to get emotionally attached to anyone in here. It would only hurt him so much more in the end. He couldn't allow himself to slip up like this again. "Thank you, but everything is all right. I am sorry that you needed to see this," he said. "What the F are you sorry for? I don't think that anyone can control this sheet." Just make sure it never happens in a fight or otherwise you'll die half and half. I ain't saying you need help, but it surely looks like you do, the blonde was yelling again. Give him some space, brat. With that his mother grabbed her son's shoulders and pulled him back. This family surely was something. I am Mitsuki Bakugu, the brat's mother, and that is my husband Masaru. It's nice to meet you, Shuto, the woman said. Okay, so these two were Katsuki's parents. Not that it hadn't been clear before, but he knew their names now. Though he wasn't 100% sure if that was a good or bad thing. It's a pleasure to meet you, miss, Shuto replied. At least your soulmate has better manners than you, brat. Shut your effing trap, old hag. Don't talk to me like that. I am your mother. I brought you into this world and this is how you thank me, you little brat. Don't embarrass me in front of my effing soulmate, hag. Oh, as if you hadn't done enough of that already. I wouldn't be surprised if he has already decided that you aren't the right one for him. That's not how soulmates work, old hag. You can't just reject your soulmate. That wouldn't make any effing sense. Well, maybe fate makes an exception for you, brat. If so, then Dad would have rejected you, old hag. Nonetheless, this went on for a while. Shuto was just standing there. Both of them were angry, but no one had gotten physically hurt yet, and it seemed like they were just insulting each other for fun. Like no one was taking any of this seriously. But why? Yelling wasn't meant for something like that. Yelling was meant as a warning so that you knew when a hit was coming, but total silence was also one. It was always worse when his dad had been silent, always hurt more, so much more. Shuto still had a lot of bruises from the last training, and he knew that his old man would be everything but happy when he noticed that Shuto wasn't answering his phone. Not that he could, Katsuki had destroyed it, but Endeavor wouldn't care about that. This isn't going to end soon. Do you need something to drink, Shochan, or some soup? Izuku asked. Shuto shook his head. He wasn't that thirsty. Before Shuto knew what was happening, the greenette had grabbed his arm and pulled him towards one of the doors. He flinched at the touch. Izuku's fingers were touching one of the bruises and it hurt. He pressed his teeth together and hissed in pain, trying to loosen the grip on his arm. Izuku let go almost immediately. The look on his face was one of shock, and he stared at his hand. That, or maybe Izuku's hissing, was it that made Katsuki's attention shift away from the argument he had with his mother. Hey, I am still talking to you, brat. Don't ignore me. Katsuki just ignored her and walked over to them while Masaru, that was his name, right, tried to calm his wife down a bit. Izuku was still staring at his hand like it had betrayed him or something, and Shuto had placed his left hand on the fabric of his right sleeve, careful to not press down on the bruise anymore. Did you hurt him, shitty Deku? Katsuki questioned. No, Kak and I would never do something like that. I didn't hurt you, right, Shochan? Izuku asked and turned towards him. I don't know where you got that crazy idea from. I would never hurt my son, right, Shuto? Too similar. It was just too similar. Shuto a shacking breath into his lungs and took a step away from both of them. I am fine. Izuku didn't do anything. I just ran into a door, Shuto replied. Ran into a door? Ran into a effing door? How stupid do you think we actually are? Half and half. No one with half a brain cell is going to believe that shit, the blonde yelled. The dual quirk user flinched, hugged himself, and stared at the floor, because how was he supposed to answer that without making them think he was a liar, a person that wasn't trustworthy? Not that it wasn't true, but what was he supposed to do? He couldn't tell them the truth, couldn't tell anyone the truth. Izuku, who had still been holding the blanket tucked under his free arm, took said blanket away from its spot and handed it to Shuto, who hesitated a moment before he decided to at least about that part, and wrapped it around a shoulder. The blanket was incredibly fluffy and an All Might themed. He hadn't that before, but now that he thought about it, there was a lot of All Might merch in the apartment, and he meant a lot. They at least had something in common. Though most of the population were fans of All Might. Everyone loved All Might, well, except a few villains, but that didn't count. He noticed that Katsuki and Izuku were both still looking at him. It's fine, really, I just overdid it with training yesterday. Nothing you'll need to worry about, Shuto said in the end. It wasn't fully a lie, his wounds had something to do with training. We are already going to you, so don't do that again. I don't want you breaking your bones or some shit like that. Half and half. You don't need to worry, it won't happen again, Shuto replied with a forced smile. You won't notice it again. Because of all the yelling and screaming going on, he hadn't noticed that Izuku's mother was talking with someone over the phone and had hung up only a few seconds ago. She turned toward Shudo and he didn't need to guess twice to know who had just called. Because Inko Midoriya's facial expression was something between slightly flattered and really confused. Your father called Todoroki-kun. He wants you to come home immediately. He said your sister is already waiting for you and both of them were worried because you didn't answer your phone, she told him. It wasn't like Shudo would have been able to answer his phone because said phone wasn't working anymore because of a certain explosive teen that was also one of his soulmates. Then I apologize for causing you any trouble. I will go home immediately. Katsuki, Izuku, see you two tomorrow at Yue. Endeavor was quiet. It was never good when he was quiet. The number 2 hero was walking the training room up and down again and again. Shudo was standing in the middle of the room. He had gotten dressed in normal clothes as soon as he had gotten home. He didn't want to need to explain burned patched on his school uniform. Your teacher needed to call me to inform me, your father, that my son had met both his soulmates on his first day at UA, which also means that you have missed school once already. Do you know what light that shines onto me? Not a good one, Shudo. Not a good one, Enji said calmly. This was so much worse than he thought it would be. His father was never calm. It wasn't my fault. You can't know when you'll meet your soulmates and the school is required by the law to give us a day off when we meet them. I wasn't even the one who pointed out that we were soulmates. I couldn't have called you even if I wanted to. My phone doesn't work anymore. Shudo tried to defend himself. He knew that he was just making it worse, but keeping his mouth shut wouldn't help either. He bit his lips so hard that it bled. Stop making excuses for everything. A villain also isn't going to accept any of those. How will you ever be hero with such behavior? I didn't raise you like this, Shudo. Do I need to teach you another lesson already? It wasn't a question, it never was a question, and Shudo knew that he would regret it in just a few minutes, but he couldn't keep his mouth shut anymore. You aren't a villain, you are my father. Beating your child has nothing to do with raising them. I hate you, Shudo yelled. The flames were getting hotter and Shudo wasn't ready to dodge as his father grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up into the air. The only reason for why you haven't ended up like Tuya yet is your quirk. The one thing Shudo felt after that was pain. Everything hurt. He could barely breathe and it felt like his ribs wasn't where it should be, but he was not a doctor, he couldn't be sure about it. Shudo could barely move, there was just too much pain and he was only able to open his eyes a little bit. The room was dark, he didn't know how long he had laid there but he was still in the training room, he could feel the burns all over his back and torso. It hurt so much. But these wounds wouldn't leave scars, weren't able to leave scars because of his quirk. Because of how his body was made. Fire never left scars upon his skin. Maybe it would be better if it did. Maybe his father would think that he wasn't perfect anymore, not his little masterpiece. Maybe he would let Shudo breathe for once. His fingers twitched a bit but he still couldn't move or stand up even if his lives had depended on it. He would just die here and maybe that would be better. His breathing was ragged. Half of the room was covered in ice, his quirk desperately trying to protect him, not that anything could protect him from Endeavor's rage and ambitions. If Shudo really wanted to be a hero didn't matter. He closed his eyes again, maybe he could fall asleep or unconscious, he wouldn't care which one it would be. Shudo just wanted everything to turn black for a few hours. He wanted a bit of peace, he knew that he couldn't have it for long but he needed it for a short while. He heard the door to the room open and steps coming towards him. They were too light to be his father's and Enji surely wouldn't come back just yet. Shudo wasn't in a state where he could go through another training without permanent damage. Cold fingers touched his forehead and Fuyumi brushed a few strands of sweaty hair out of his face, tucking it behind his ear in the process. Not that it would stay there for long, his hair was too short for that. Shudo forced his eyes to open a little bit. Fuyumi was kneeling over him. Concern was the only emotion visible in her eyes as she reached out again and placed one of her hands on his left cheek. He hadn't noticed it before but the fire inside of him was raging, his left side, his father's powers. It felt like they wanted to get out, wanted to be used. Shudo didn't know if this abomination of his father's quirk wanted to protect him or just destroy everything in its wake, but he wasn't keen to figure it out. The cold of Fuyumi's hand helped calm the flames down a bit. Her hands were always so cold, too cold, even for someone with an ice quirk. Her body would have been more suited for a fire one, like Tuya would have been more suited for an ice quirk. But the two eldest siblings hadn't been lucky. Tuya had been killed by his own quirk, his own two hot flames, and Fuyumi couldn't use her own for more than a few minutes without her body becoming too cold to function properly. Fuyumi, he whispered. Why was she crying? Had Endeavor hurt her too? But as far as he could see, she was fine, but tears were running down her cheeks. He tried to lift his hand up to comfort her, but there was too much pain, he couldn't move a mere inch. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice even quieter than his own had been. I'm so sorry Shudo. He wanted to her that she didn't need to be, that nothing of this was her fault, that she herself should get out of this house because she was able to do so. Endeavor wouldn't stop her. He didn't really care what any of his failures did, as long as it didn't hurt his reputation. Fuyumi should just leave, rent an apartment near the elementary school she worked at. It would be the best for her to leave. Shudo wouldn't blame her for it, it wasn't her job to keep him safe. She should just live her own life, Shudo would be fine. Endeavor wouldn't let him die. He wasn't like Tuya. He would be dead if he was like Tuya. If he wouldn't have been born, Tuya would probably be still alive. Shudo didn't remember much about his childhood, but he remembered his oldest brother. Tuya was nice, kind, and had tried to stand up to Endeavor, had tried to protect Shudo. He himself didn't remember it all that well, but he knew that he had heard yelling that night, so much yelling, and then there had been screaming of utter agony and pain, and it sounded like someone was dying, and then there was only the sound of fire. The next day Endeavor had told them that Tuya was dead, that he had been killed in a tragic accident. No one, not even Fuyumi, had believed that for a second. It's not your fault, he finally managed to get out. Fuyumi just shook her head and carefully lifted his head up a bit, placing it onto her lap to make him a bit more comfortable. It's my fault, I am your older sister, I am supposed to protect you, she said. Shudo shook his head slightly. It hurt, everything hurt. No, it's your job to leave this house and get a live of your own. I am not your responsibility, he replied. His head hurt too, and all the pain just got worse from moment to moment, and it felt like his brain was about to explode. I am an adult, Shudo, you are still a child. It is my responsibility to keep you safe. He wanted to say something, wanted to prove her wrong, but he felt something rise up in his throat and moved his head to the side so that he wouldn't vomit onto himself or his sister. He didn't feel sick, but he still threw up onto the floor mats. Why was it red? The ground began to move, and it felt like he was on a ship that was trapped in a storm, and he wasn't able to sit up anymore. He heard that Fuyumi was saying something, but he couldn't understand what it was. Shudo was laying on his side, a liquid, probably blood, was coming out of his mouth, and everything just hurt even more. He heard what sounded like someone running before everything turned black. At least he didn't feel the pain anymore. The first thing he noticed as he began to wake up was that someone was softly holding his hand and rubbing their finger in circles over it. There was also a constant annoying beeping sound that only got faster as he tried to fall back into unconsciousness again. The hand that was holding his own was neither too cold nor too hot, so it couldn't be anyone from his family. He felt no pain anymore, everything felt just very numb, and he was still so tired. It also felt like something was wrong with his left arm. It wasn't pain, but it felt like something was stuck in it, though Shudo wasn't sure about that. He wasn't able to get back into the nothingness he had been in before. The beeping just continued, and he wanted to turn whatever was causing this sound off and throw it out of the window. Shudo decided to keep his eyes closed for now and tried to relax a bit. The beeping slowed down a bit, and there was someone who was still rubbing circles on top of his hand. Maybe they tried to calm him down too. He didn't know who they were. Kaken, what are you doing? Someone asked. Wait, Kaken? That could only be Izuku, and Katsuki was here too? Or even was here. Shudo did not move. He didn't even try to move his fingers, even though that might be possible, but he decided against it. I am planning on how to murder whoever did that to him. You can't just kill people, Kaken. We don't even know who is responsible for this. My soulmate is in the FING hospital because someone beat the shit out of him minutes after his father had left the house. I have every right to be angry as stupid nerd. He is our soulmate, Kaken, and I don't want to see him hurt either, but it won't help him if you continue to scream. Someone might throw us out. Wouldn't let those fuckers do that. Half and Half has been here way too long. Isn't it weird that his father hasn't shown up once after he had told us what had happened? Kaken, Endeavor is the #2 hero. He has work to do, and I am sure that he worries about his son all the time. You need to calm down, and you heard what the doctor said. It won't help Shudo's recovery if there is too much noise. I know that, Deku. I was standing 5 foot away from you. It's still weird both of his siblings were here more than once. Do I need to remind you that it took his brother a few hours to even get here? Please, Kaken, you need to calm down. I know how you feel. He is also my soulmate, and I know how much it hurts to see him like this, but we can't change it. Shut the f***. I am still trying to plan a murder here. That were definitely his soulmates. Shudo could recognize their voices. He should probably open his eyes or try to move his fingers to let them know that he's conscious again. But he just couldn't bring himself to do so. They would want an explanation, one that he couldn't give them. Endeavor had probably told them something that was so far away from the truth that it was funny, but he had the feeling that they would want to hear his side of the story too. He wouldn't be able to give them what they wanted. So, he continued to lay still, and the beeping of what was definitely some sort of machine was still the most prominent sound in the room. Shudo needed to stay calm, or otherwise someone would notice that he was awake. How long had he even been here? Most likely more than 1 day because of what his soulmates had said, but he didn't know the exact time. Why don't you go back to talking to an unconscious person like a weirdo? Katsuki asked. The doctor said that it might help him, and I was just about to do that, Kaken, Izuku replied. Then the grip on his hand tightened a bit and the greenette began to talk again. Hey, I don't know if you can even hear me, but you've already missed a whole week of school. Not that it is really that important, but Kaken and I took notes for you, and Aizawa-sensei said it was okay. Something happened today at school. You don't need to worry though, everyone is fine. Recovery girl said that she couldn't help you yet, not as long as you are unconscious. She said it would be too dangerous if she tried to use her quirk on you right now. My mom was here too right now. She is getting some food for us. Your dad wasn't here today, but I am pretty sure he is just as worried about you as we are. Katsuki is worried too. He tries to hide it behind anger, but I am not stupid. The doctor said it could have been worse if your sister hadn't called an ambulance. He also said that you should wake up soon. This would have been nice if Shudo didn't still feel like he was about to die every second. He heard sobbing, and at the moment he couldn't pretend that he was unconscious anymore. It would be evil to do so. Shudo softly tightened his hold onto Izuku's hand as he opened his eyes again. The light was just so bright. He didn't expect to have his arms full of a bundle with green hair that was hugging him so tightly that he thought he might pass out again from just that. Shudo began to comb his fingers through the messy green more out of instinct than free will. He couldn't say it was uncomfortable though. The red strings weren't just decoration, they could be used but only in a handful of situations, and most people only ever tried to tug at them slightly to reassure their soulmate that they were well. Shudo himself had never done so. His father wouldn't have allowed it. He continued to run his fingers through the locks. How could anyone's hair be so soft? The tugging at his arm turned out to be N4 that was letting some unknown substance right into his vein, right into his body. Shudo wanted to pull it out, but that would be one of the dumbest things he could do in this situation. You are awake, you are awake, you are awake. Izuku mumbled so quietly that he could hardly understand the words. He did not try to hush Izuku. Just let the other teen cry until he had no more tears left, and just held him, allowed him to put wet spots that came from tears onto his shirt. So, he had been unconscious for more than a week, or at least a week, he wasn't sure. Shudo just hoped that Fuyumi hadn't worried too much about him. None of this had been her fault. He had been the one who made their father angry because Shudo hadn't followed orders. All of this was his own fault. His father would now be just even more angry because Shudo had missed at least 5 days of school altogether. Endeavor would be raging with anger. He looked around the room. The walls were gray, a different tone than the tiles of the floor, but still gray. He felt the other teen shift in his hold, and Izuku looked up at him. We were scared that you might never wake up, he said. I feel better now. You two don't need to worry about me so much, I'll be fine. Shut the F up, half and half. You've been in a FING coma for a week. Don't try to tell me that you are fine, Katsuki yelled. The sheer loudness of his voice hurt Shudo's ears, and he covered them with his hands. He was still laying down on the bed, and the beeping sound had gotten a bit faster. Kaken, you know what the doctor said, no loud sounds, Izuku said. The greenette got up from the bed and sat down in a plastic chair that had been placed next to it. He probably had been sitting there for hours without end and Shudo felt bad for him. They didn't need to be here, he would also be okay if they weren't. Shudo's throat felt dry. It didn't hurt as much as it was uncomfortable, but he still didn't like the feeling. He cleared his throat and tried to sit up. Shudo fell back onto the mattress. He couldn't sit and barely move anything except his arms and head. The dual quirk user could barely feel his legs at all. He tried to move his toes and was relieved that it worked. That meant that his spine was fine, right? Izuku carefully touched Shudo's hand again, intertwining their fingers and tightening his grip. Shudo let it pass. They were obviously worried about him. But what? He was still alive. There was no reason for them to be worried. They would only feel pain if he died. The strings would turn black and snap a few days later. His mother had told him that it hurt like hell, that it felt like someone was ripping your soul apart, and she had experienced it twice. Shudo bit his lip and swallowed hard. He wasn't scared of his old man, he was terrified of Endeavor. Katsuki had left his place at the window and walked over to them. His steps were a bit louder than Izuku's and slower. Shudo looked at both of his soulmates. It didn't look like either of them had slept much in the last few days. Did this mean that they were sick because of him? Another thing that was his own fault and no one else's. If he had followed orders and hadn't been so goddamn weak, he wouldn't have ended up here in the first place. All of this was his fault. So, care to explain how you ended up here half and half? We were worried about your FNG, but when you didn't show up at school the next day. We took a train to your house and your sister needed to tell us that you were at the hospital. Shitty Deku was even crying. Katsuki said quietly. Well, it wasn't really quietly if it come out of a normal person's mouth, but this was Katsuki after all, so it was rather quiet. Yes, your father told us the overall story, but we want to know what happened exactly. Kaken wants to hunt whoever hurt you down. I normally don't agree with him, but this time I am not far away from helping him do exactly that. What was Shudo supposed to say? They wouldn't believe him if he said the truth, and he couldn't make something up with knowing exactly what Endeavor had told them. He had heard that Izuku had said something about an intruder, but he just wasn't sure. What did my father tell you? Shudo asked. He knew that it was risky, but what other choice did he have? He said that Izuku wasn't able to finish his sentence. Don't you effing dare, Deku. Something is off here. I can basically smell when someone wants to tell me shit. You tell us your story first and don't try to get out of it. This was bad, really bad. He couldn't tell them anything. Wait a moment. He had been unconscious for a few days, so what if he just didn't remember? Shudo knew exactly what had happened, remembered all the pain, every single hit, every single burn. So yes, he had to lie to his soulmates, but he didn't have a choice. No one would believe the truth. There is a problem with that, Katsuki. I don't remember. The last thing I can recall is opening the front door when I arrived home. The rest is just gone. Shudo lied. Izuku seemed to think about it for a second and then placed a hand under his chin. It took him a moment before he answered. His doctor said that something like this might happen. You don't need to worry, Sho-chan. I am sure that you'll get your memories back soon, Izuku said. But something about it seemed off, like he wasn't believing him. But Shudo wasn't really sure if he saw it right. On the hand was more obvious about it. He didn't believe a word and he didn't even try to hide, but the blonde also didn't say a thing about it. He just glared at Shudo, but it was different from the glares his father gave him. It didn't seem to have an equally bad intent behind it. He still wasn't sure about it, and no one said a word for the moment. Before Katsuki pulled Izuku out of the chair, ripping his hand from Shudo's in the process, and shoved him away before he himself sat down and grabbed the Todoroki's hand himself. Izuku rolled his eyes and went to get another chair. Shudo just looked at the blonde with a very confused expression. No hard feelings, I just wanted the warm one, Katsuki said. He knew that he could have just asked, right? He didn't need to shove people around. Shudo kept his mouth shut though. He wasn't going to accidentally make someone with such a temper even more angry. Izuku came back with another chair and a glass of water in the hand he didn't use to carry it. He handed the drink to Shudo and placed the chair on the right side of the bed before he sat down. The dual quirk user wrapped his fingers around the glass and took a sip. The water was cold and it helped the pain in his throat a bit. Thank you, Izuku. The greenette just gifted him a kind smile. Shudo wouldn't say that Izuku was adorable, but he couldn't also deny that he was cute, which didn't mean that he was weak. Shudo didn't actually know what exactly Izuku's quirk was, but he had the feeling that it was something strong. He wouldn't underestimate someone because of their looks. He wasn't his father. The door to the hospital room opened and Inko Midoriya entered. She was holding a few bags of what looked like food, which she dropped the second she saw that he was awake. Katsuki picked them up while Shudo was being wrapped into another hug, this time by one of Soulmate's mother. That felt okay? The first surprise was that Izuku's mother and Katsuki's parents brought him fresh cooked meals every single day. The doctors had said that he was allowed to leave in a few days and Endeavor still hadn't visited them yet, and Shudo felt a tiny bit grateful for that, but he also knew that his father wouldn't stay away forever. He was still on painkillers, but the doses that were giving him were getting weaker from day to day. At least Shudo could walk again. Well, sometimes he needed to lean onto someone after a few steps, but at least he was getting better. He was sitting up on the hospital bed, dressed in a pair of sweatpants and a loose shirt that Fuyumi had brought him. His legs were hanging over the edge while Katsuki was basically throwing paper sheets and school notes at him. Well, throwing wasn't the right word. Katsuki was trying to help him get the lessons he had missed in week into his head, in the span of a few hours. Izuku had left to go to the bathroom a few moments ago and wasn't back yet. Katsuki was loud, but he wasn't stupid, and if he stopped yelling, he was actually able to explain things rather well. So Shudo could understand what was going on and actually get all the work done. His soulmate was still very loud and it was partly annoying, but Shudo could deal with this. His ears picked up something. There were muffled voices coming from the other side of the door. Then someone opened it, and what was Present Mike doing here, and why was he carrying their homeroom teacher, and why was said homeroom teacher wrapped in bandages and seemingly tried to strangle to loud blonde hero to death? Katsuki didn't seem to be any less confused than Shudo. Present Mike put Aizawa-sensei down a moment later and received a glare that looked like it could kill, and then turned towards his student. How could he even see? Nearly his whole face was covered in bandages too. Izuku had told him about the USJ incident, the League of Villains attacking, all of that. The wounds must have been from that. If you ever do that again, I will kill you, Hisashi, their teacher hissed at the other man. Come on, show Yuta. Recovery girl said you shouldn't move too much and you wanted to visit our little listener here. The last part was way too loud because someone thought using a voice quirk in a closed-off room was a good idea. Shudo was still confused. Were two friends or soulmates? It wasn't clear. Could they even be soulmates? They were polar opposites. But Shudo knew that didn't mean anything. You didn't need to carry me, Yamada. I'm sorry, Suda. Please, I'm sorry. This was very weird to watch, and even Katsuki took a few steps back and gave their teacher another confused look. Class 1, as homeroom teacher, then turned towards Shudo, ignoring the pro as if he wasn't there, and opened his mouth. It's good to see that you better, Todoroki-kun, and you sees forward to dash. Someone opened the door again and straight up ran into the room. What the F is All Might doing here? Katsuki swore. Shudo couldn't agree more with him right now. Everyone, even the two teachers. Well, he knew that All Might was a teacher too, but Shudo hadn't been in any of his classes yet, and the general public didn't know that he actually was a teacher for sure. We're still staring at All Might. Shudo grabbed the sheets tighter and pulled them further up. This was very weird and more than just uncomfortable. But really, how were you supposed to act when All Might just showed up in your hospital room out of nowhere and for no reason whatsoever? What was he even doing here? Shudo didn't know him, hadn't seen the number one hero more than a handful of time in his life, and that had only been the case because his Endeavor had wanted to show off his little perfect masterpiece to all the other heroes. If Shudo thought about it for a bit longer, it became clear that his father didn't even see him as a person of his own. Only a tool to best All Might. Something that Endeavor himself would never be able to accomplish. His father's body would overheat if he used his quirk for too long. Shudo wasn't able to have a problem in that department. He could regulate his body temperature. But he wasn't doing it and never would. Shudo wouldn't use his cursed left side, the DMN hell flames that were raging just beneath his skin. He didn't know if it was real or if he was just imagining things now, but it felt like they were raging with anger. The flames wanted to burn something, reduce an object, or even a living being to nothing more than a bit of ash. Shudo didn't fear his flames, he just hated what they could do to people. He was less likely to kill someone with ice than with fire, and he would die before using his father's power. Though there was something about his quirk that didn't make a lot of sense. Endeavor's flames were able to harm him, plaster flames all over his body, but they never left scars behind, but fire that was even hotter didn't leave a single mark, not even for a second. He didn't know where it came from, maybe genetic mutation? Tuya wouldn't have been hurt and killed by his own goddamn blue flames if he had it. They had been so hot that they could potentially even kill Endeavor. Not that his brother would have ever done something like that. Tuya had been too nice, but he had also been hurt so much. Shudo missed him, but Tuya was dead and there was no quirk that could bring him back. Burned to death by his own quirk in the house, Shudo still lived into the day. He was only a teenager and he just missed his brothers so much. "What are you doing here, All Might?" Aizawa asked. "I am just here to visit one of my students." "I see you are already better, Todoroki-kun, but I am also here to inform that Nedzu will allow you to participate in the sports festival," the #1 hero announced. "If his doctor says it is all right. I am here to talk to Endeavor." "What is your excuse, All Might?" Eraserhead replied. The #1 hero looked a little bit confused for less than the blink of an eye before the smile was back on his face. "Nedzu said that I should talk to Endeavor," he explained. "Do you really need to speak to my father? He is a very busy man," Shudo said. He didn't want all the attention on the room to be focused on him, but it would be better for them if they didn't stick their nose into business that wasn't their own. Endeavor had money and power and no one would be able to do something even if they knew. They would just feel bad about themselves if they even believed him in the first place, and that in itself was nearly impossible. "Yes, this is very important. We think that someone might have bribed your doctor. We aren't sure who and why, but we will figure it out. We suspect that their intentions might have been to harm you and let it look like an accident, but we aren't sure. Mike didn't want me to tell you this, but it's very possible that someone is after your life," Aizawa said. "Oh, so someone had noticed that a certain flaming hero was very good at bribing doctors to keep their mouths shut, because every person that knew something about medicine would notice the older wounds too, those that couldn't be explained away. But money could buy you a lot of silence from a lot of people. Maybe the doctor had slipped up because Endeavor wasn't stupid enough to mess that up." Shudo didn't say a word and just raised an eyebrow. "We need to talk with your father about this. He might know who would want to harm you, young Todoroki, and we need to get this person before they try to attack you again and ends up more successful than before. Your life is in danger and it also UA's job to protect its student. And I am also here. No one will be able to hurt you while you are at UA." All Might didn't know how wrong he was. UA would try to protect him, they could try, but they wouldn't be able to. The teachers and staff would be on the lookout for villains and criminals, not for the #2 hero. Shudo wasn't mad at them, but it was kind of sad that they even felt the need to protect him at all. He was going to be hero, he needed to be able to look out for himself. No one would be there to save him when he was older. His fingers curled tighter around the cold sheets and he pulled them even closer to his chest. "I don't need any protection, you won't even be able to protect me," he said. "I am back, Sho. Oh my god, All Might." Izuku was back. The Greenette was looking at the #1 hero in awe, which really didn't make that much sense. All Might had already been their teacher for a week. Why was Deku still acting so happy just because he saw him? Shudo shrugged it off. It didn't matter at all. He shouldn't even be thinking about this. He looked back to their homeroom and English teacher and noticed the look the present Mike was giving him. It was a weird one. One that Shudo was not able to place in any defined category. The voice hero was touching his face, his cheeks and chin like he was checking something, searching for something. It didn't seem reasonable. "Shoyuta, what if we leave those little listeners alone for now? They have been through so much already. You told me about this new cat cafe you wanted to go to." Present Mike yelled, and he wasn't even using his quirk at the moment. It was still loud and it still hurt Shudo's ears. Cat cafe? So, this meant that they were soulmates and not just friends, right? These two could still just be really close platonic friends. But something told him that it wasn't true. Maybe he was just wrong. "Not in front of our students, Hizashi, but you are right. All Might, don't you have a mission to go to? Todoroki, would you please be so kind and tell your father that he should call me as soon as possible? I am terribly sorry for leaving already, but I need to calm a loud blonde down before glass begins to shatter," Aizawa replied, annoyed. Shudo wasn't sleeping, though he was very close to doing so. But Katsuki was asleep, and surprisingly a very quiet sleeper. Oh, and he was holding Shudo's left hand like it was lifeline, but he wasn't cutting of any circulation, so it was alright for now. Shudo wasn't getting emotionally attached to anyone, this was just comfortable and warm, and that was the end of it. Izuku was just running his fingers carefully through dual-colored hair because Shudo was in the hospital and this was completely normal thing to do. He relaxed a bit more into the touch, only because it was calming the raging storm of thoughts in his head down. He was only moments away from slipping into a hopefully dreamless sleep as the door opened again. At first, he thought that it might be Fuyumi, one of their teachers, Izuku's mother, or Katsuki's parents. But then the smell of something burning hit his nose and he pressed his eyelids together. Maybe his father would leave if he thought that Shudo was sleeping. It had never worked before, but he still prayed that it did this time. Shudo! No, it did not. He heard Katsuki groan in annoyance and felt the blonde grab his arm too. Someone was really tired. It is nice to meet you, Mr. Todoroki. Endeavor, sir. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I am one of your son's soulmates. The greenette introduced himself while he got back to his feet and walked over to the number 2 hero. Maybe that had been a mistake. Shudo opened his eyes a bit and lifted himself up into a sitting position while Katsuki was still attached to his arm like a leech. Note that he had called Izuku exactly that some time ago. This will not stand in my son's way of becoming a pro, Endeavor said. Shudo was looking at them. He wanted to say something but he couldn't get a word out of his lips. This was just embarrassing. Finding your soulmate does have a bad impact onto anyone's life, Izuku replied. Endeavor looked towards his son, eyes locking onto the blonde for a second before he turned back to the green-haired teen. You are aware that my son has 2 soulmates. You know that it normally doesn't end well. If he hurts my son, you will be hurt too. Izuku's reaction to that was unexpected, very unaccepted. Izuku stood up a bit straighter and the smile from his face vanished, being replaced by an icy cold glare. The corner of his mouth sucked into a slight grin. You really think Kaken would be the dangerous one? Everyone would surely suspect that it would be him if something happened, but do you really think that is what would happen? This would be so boring. He laughed. The police would just investigate and they would never find a single clue to what happened to your son, and the heroes wouldn't be able to help either because everyone would just suspect the wrong person. You would never see your son again and probably die in an accident, and it isn't like I can break every bone in your body with just a single flick of my finger. Oh, and what the news would do about this story, it would so interesting to see. Kaken isn't the most dangerous soulmate of your son. I could take him away from all you in less than an hour and no one would notice it at first. I am not stupid or weak, Endeavor, don't forget that. Enji Todoroki looked shocked, Shudo was shocked, Katsuki would be shocked too if he hadn't been sleeping right now. Then Izuku's smile was back and he really looked adorable if he didn't play the villain for whatever reason. I am joking, I wouldn't do something like that. Endeavor visible swallowed before he turned on his heel and walked towards the door again, still glaring at Izuku and Katsuki as if they were the plague in personification. Izuku had already returned to his prior position and let his fingers wander through red and white hair that should probably get a cut soon. His father only said one thing before he left the hospital room again. We will leave tomorrow, Shudo. I met one of your teachers in the parking lot. He told me that the school allowed it. You will participate in the sports festival and we need to resume your training as soon as possible. The event is only a few weeks away. He was going to be a hero and he was going to prove everyone who had ever doubted him wrong, and he couldn't give any less about the 2 red strings that were connected to his left ring finger. His soulmates would just be like anyone else, would call him a villain, a monster. Something that should be locked away. Shinso wasn't stupid enough to believe that they would be different. Because no one was different, he was still forced to wear a muzzle at home because his foster parents thought that he was a bad influence for everyone in the home. This was his chance to get into the hero department, his one and only chance. The first part of the festival was alright, not the best he had ever done, but it was okay. Next was the cavalry battle. It would be okay, and he just needed a few people with offensive, oh so heroic quirks to answer his questions. He knew that it was kind of villainous, but it didn't really matter. He wanted to be a hero and this was the only way. He was not going to be the villain everyone thought he was. It wasn't supposed to end in a catastrophe, but it did end in one. Well, it rather ended up with a loud, very loud blonde yelling something at him over the whole field. Calling it something wasn't right because Shinso was able to understand what it was, but that didn't make it any better. So, yes, Maybe he did something stupid and ran out of the arena like someone was after his life, but he couldn't just stand there. Because this loud, probably crazy blonde was one of his soulmates, and the guy probably was crazy because no normal human being would yell like that and insult Class 1A at the same time. Shinso didn't know what the guy's quirk was, but he also didn't care. He knew that this was the move of a coward and that it was kind of very illegal to run away from your soulmates, except if they were villain or trying to injure you, and he could get into a lot of trouble for this, but he didn't give a f dash. Shinso knew that he couldn't get out of the actual building. He wasn't stupid enough to think that he could really run away from pro heroes. He slammed the door to the bathroom shut and locked it after he had entered and placed his hands onto both sides of the sink. He knew how this was going to end. He wouldn't been able to participate in the sports festival anymore. Getting into the hero course wasn't possible anymore. It had been his only chance. A lot of people would argue and say that finding your soulmate is so much better than a stupid childhood dream you had. Shinso wouldn't agree. It was more than just the stupid dream of a little child. He needed to do this, he needed to prove them wrong, and he wanted to be a hero more than anything. But this dream had been crushed right in front of his eyes by a single stupid red string. Why did people even think that soulmates were so important? There was nothing special about them, and he even had more than one, which didn't make it any better. His mother was dead because of this sickness. He would never call it anything else. Having two soulmates couldn't be anything else. Shinsu's own father had killed his mother's other soulmate, and his mother was dead because of him too. He didn't want any strings, he just wanted them to leave him alone. Now his dream was crushed because one stupid a-hole couldn't keep his mouth shut for a few more hours. Shinso was angry. Couldn't the universe give him a bit of peace just once? He looked at his own reflection in the mirror, for he couldn't use his own quirk on himself, but even if he could, that wouldn't be very helpful right now. His shacking fingers turned the water on, and he splashed a bit of the cold liquid onto his face. No, this wasn't helping at all. They would find him soon. There were cameras, and it didn't take a genius to figure out where he went. Even if there were no legal actions taken in the next few days, he would still need to listen to a lot of stuff. There were a lot of people who didn't understand why he wouldn't want to meet his soulmates. They knew of the 80% that went to shit, and his foster parents even knew how his mother had died, but they didn't care. Not one single person on the whole planet did. He dried his face off with the lower half of the sport uniform shirt before he turned away from the mirror, and was about to hit the wall next to him, because how was he supposed to deal with this, as someone knocked on the door. Shinso stilled for a moment. At least they had the decency to knock before they broke the door down. Leave me alone. He didn't even try to use his quirk. It would just make everything even worse, and Shinso just wanted them to leave him alone right now. This soulmate of his could die for all he cared. You know you can't hide in there forever. This is childish young Shinso. Wait a second. Wait a goddamn second. He knew that voice. They send All Might. These idiots really send All Might. Were they stupid? What if Shinso had really lost it and used his quirk on the #1 hero? Did they even think about that? Obviously not. But Shinso didn't say a word after that. He was a teenager, not an adult. He wasn't supposed to act reasonable all the time, and what he was doing right now wasn't even childish, it was perfectly normal. But he knew that he couldn't run away from this forever. He unlocked the door and opened it, coming face to face with All Might, and oh god, Eraserhead was standing behind the #1 hero. Shinso might need to ask for an autograph soon, and no, he didn't want one from All Might at all. Why did you run away? Your soulmate is worried about you? All Might asked. It doesn't matter, Shinso replied. There wasn't much talking after that, and he ended up not asking for an autograph from anyone and was sitting in what could only be the teacher's lounge at UA. His supposed soulmate wasn't here yet, and Shinso didn't know if that was a good or bad thing. He's a liar. No, that moron from the Calls of Morons is the one who can't speak a word of truth. He really didn't want to know what was going on in front the door, but he was not thrilled about what it implied. So, you kind of stopped the sports festival for a few hours. A lot of people were quite surprised about all of that. But it was such a great show, you need to watch the recordings later, little listener. And you looked like you need something to bring your spirits back up, so I borrowed one of Shuta's cats, Present Mike said. Shinso didn't know that the man was even able to talk like a normal person, and he needed a moment to register exactly what he had said before something was dropped into his arms. Yes, hadn't Mike said that he had basically stolen a cat? He looked at the little bundle of fur in his arms. The cat had blackened white fur and was the most adorable thing he had ever seen. How could anything be that cute? He petted the tiny animal a bit and it cuddled itself against him. It helped to calm his nerves down a bit. How had Mike known that? I think it might have more things to do with the fact that I ran out and that a certain soulmate's first words to me were a yelled and I repeat, "See that one, that brainwasher is mine," and that moron held his arm up while he yelled. How did he even know what my quirk was? Shinso replied. He clamped his mouth shut after that. He had accidentally asked a question. His quirk wasn't activated, but it didn't matter, he had still asked and he wasn't supposed to. I don't know, maybe he saw you using it in the first event. But that isn't even the most cinematic part of it. A student from Class 1A also claims to be your soulmate and now both of them are calling the other a liar and Shoyuta is trying to keep them from overreacting. I think I should go out and help him. Be right back, little listener. Mike yelled and skipped out of the room. Something soft nuzzled against Shinsu's hand and he went back to running his fingers through the soft fur. Cats were really calming. But who was this Shoyuta that present Mike had been talking about? He had been the one that the screaming hero had stolen the cat from after all. He didn't know a pro hero with that name, maybe it was a civilian? The door swung open again and two teenagers were thrown into the room by what looked like Eraserhead's capture weapon. They were both blonde, though the hair texture and style differed a lot, and one of them had what looked like a black W in his hair, or maybe it could be a weird-looking lighting bolt. Shinso wasn't sure. Now, Shinsuke, could you please clear this situation up because I am tired of these two, the underground hero said. There is no question here, this idiot from 1A is just jealous of me, the first loud blonde replied. Shinso looked at them and then at his left hand. They were both his goddamn soulmates. That was just his luck. I have two strings, he stated. Eraserhead's face fell and it was only a little bit and someone who wasn't observing wouldn't see it, but the teacher looked worried. 2 in 1 years, that is a good sign, right Shoyuta? I don't know. We need to talk. Wait a second, is that one of my cats? Hey, Hisashi, let my go. Sorry Shoyuta, but we need to talk about this. See you later, listeners. Present Mike just dragged Eraserhead out of the door by his own capture scarf, and the blonde even had a smile on his face the while he did so. At least this explained who the Shoyuta was that the hero had been talking about. Shinso was still sitting on the couch, the cat curled up in his lap, and he was oddly comfortable if it wouldn't be for the two teenagers that were staring at him like he was a prey or something like that. Shinso sucked a breath into his lungs. He should have tried to run away for real when there still had been the chance. So, how does your quirk work exactly? The loud blonde without any black in his hair threw himself onto the couch next to him and tried to touch his arm. Shinso moved away. Nope, he wasn't going to let this happen. He had no idea what the guy's quirk was, but it might have something to do with touching because this didn't even seem normal for soulmates. Don't let the copycat get touchy. The name is Kaminari Denki, the other one introduced himself. Kaminari should be the one from 1A if he guessed right. He was smiling at Shinso and later on sat down on the brainwasher's other side, thinking for some reason that trying to wrap an arm around Shinsu's shoulder was okay. What do you think you are doing? Shinso was using his quirk, but only because both of them were annoying the hell out of him right now. I just dash. He had him. Denki sat completely still and it was surprisingly quiet right now. The way the other one was looking at him was something different though. Monoma Nito, and I think I am already in love. Itoshi. This was the most stupid thing he had ever agreed to, and Shinso stood by that. This cafe looked way too expensive and his foster parents were going to be mad because he had missed curfew again. Even though it was their fault that he couldn't call them, they had taken his phone away because he supposedly had used his quirk on someone at home. How could he have done that when they forced him to wear a muzzle? It didn't matter. It was always his fault. Everything was his fault. Even if he had been on the opposite side of the world, they would claim him to be the culprit. We are going to split the bill, right? He asked. I can pay. Shut the F up, Pikachu. Money isn't a problem, but that idiot from 1A can pay for himself. That's not fair. You are not my soulmate. I am not required to do anything for you. You still don't have to be mean. I am not nice to anyone from your class. Shinso sighed and these two were at it again. Their arguing could take from minutes to hours, and it was weird that he even knew this already since he had met them only today. But it was annoying and he needed more coffee to deal with this. Shinso wasn't about to use his quirk on them again, at least not yet, but it got on his nerves. Maybe fate had made a mistake, these two couldn't possibly be a perfect match to him. Oh, and he would like to add that the waitress was still standing at their table. She pushed her glasses back to the brink of her nose and tipped her pen against the notepad. "Have you decided what you want to order?" she asked. It didn't look like they were about to get thrown out of, so that was good. "A black coffee and a piece of chocolate cake, I guess," Shinso replied. She scribbled something down. She turned around to walk away and probably continue doing her job before she stopped, looked back, stared at his two loud blonde soulmates for a second, and then continued her way. Alright, that had been weird. Well, he got the explanation the blink of an eye later, because both Monoma and Kaminari's noses began to bleed and they stopped their bickering as they rubbed their foreheads in pain. "What the F was that?" Kaminari cursed more than he asked. Shinso could put together what had happened, though he had never seen a person with an S-ranked telekinetic quirk, and why would someone like that not be in UA? Monoma was the one that answered instead of him. Telekinesis, probably even rank S. Oh, and unauthorized quirk use on top of that. "Please don't press any charges, you can be happy that we didn't get thrown out. It's not like you can even prove that she used her quirk on you, just let it slide," Shinso said. He could understand why she had done it, and he would have done the same if he had a quirk like that. "Whatever you want, Shinso." "Yes, Monoma, this was surely not weird in any way." In the end, the date was okay, not good by any means, and a waiter actually brought the rest of their food because the two had started arguing about nothing more than 3 times and someone might have overused their quirk. Now he wasn't ashamed of his soulmates, but it got pretty close to that. Oh, and it would be helpful to add that his soulmates had insisted on meeting his parents, and he had been just able to avoid that because there had been a villain attack a few streets away and he had it as an excuse to get out of there. Shinso had been running back home after that, explaining the whole situation wouldn't matter, he was not going to get anything to eat in the next 2 or 3 days, and yes, maybe he had eaten a bit more than usual at the cafe, but hey, Monoma had said that he had wanted to pay. Shinso had maybe used that a bit, but the guy had been acting like an a-hole all day, so it was only fair, right? He just needed to get home and get the being yelled at over with. It wasn't that bad, at least he was physically fine most of the time, not that anyone would care if he wasn't. To say Shinso was surprised would be like saying that Pompeii was just destroyed a little bit by a volcano. He needed to force his mouth to remain closed. Because how in the name everything that was holy did those two idiots even know where he lived? They were both sitting on the couch in the living room and his foster parents were acting like a normal and happy family. It was disgusting to look at. He let his eyes wander over the room. The other kids weren't here. They had most likely been sent to their rooms as soon as someone had knocked on the door. He also might want to add that both of them were wearing normal clothes and not school uniforms. The act of his foster parents might also have something to do with the fact that Monoma was dressed in things that were probably more valuable than Shinso's life in the eyes of the two adults in this room. "Shinso dear, why don't you sit down?" The sweet tone in her voice was so fake that it made him want to throw up. Shinso didn't say a word and just sat down next to Kaminari, which someone did not seem to like because said someone pushed Denki off the couch to steal the spot next to Shinso. Maybe he should just use his quirk on Monoma and tell him to stop being an a-hole for 5 minutes. "What if you tell Shinso what you told us?" Shinso knew what would happen as soon as the two left. There would be a lot of yelling and screaming and even more yelling, and maybe they would even lock him in his room. Which would mean that he would need to sneak out through the window the next morning, and he just hoped that it didn't end in a broken or twisted bone. Shinso was not happy about this. And what the hell had those two idiots told his foster parents, because the adults did not look happy about that? He recognized the way his foster mother bit her lip. But what could it be? "You might want to sit down for this because I talked to my homeroom teacher, and do you know what he agreed to?" Shinso didn't get a chance to even guess anything before Monoma revealed it, and why the hell was Kaminari still on the floor? Eraserhead agreed to train you. What the F dash? How long had they annoyed him to make the underground hero agree to this? Not that it wouldn't be great to be trained by Eraserhead, but no one would ever want to train someone with a brainwashing quirk. He just hoped that Monoma and Kaminari wouldn't get into too much trouble for whatever they had done to make the underground hero agree to this. Shinso blinked a few times. "Thank you, that is really great," he said. Shinso wasn't a good liar per se, but he also wasn't extremely bad at it. His lies were passable and that was all that he needed for now. They were both smiling at him and he couldn't do anything but smile back. He didn't like them or anything, but how had they even known that he wanted to be a hero, and why had they tried to help him like that? They could get expelled for doing something like that, and it felt that wouldn't be good for anyone. Shinso looked at the strings on his fingers and twisted one of them around his middle finger and thumb, playing with it and trying to not think about the situation he was in as much as possible. He felt a hand on his shoulder and slapped it away only the blink of an eye later. No, he knew what Monoma's quirk was, and he didn't think that the guy's was above coping brainwash and using it on its original owner. Shinso didn't trust any of them to not hurt him. He knew about the 80%, and he knew that it was so much more likely that something went horrible wrong than that it did not. Shinso wasn't delusional. So, it was better to not get too close to them, for their own sanity, and he was still kind of mad that they partly ruined his one and only chance to get into the hero course. He wouldn't forgive that too easily, but for some reason he wasn't that mad about it anymore. It needed to have something to do with this FING soul bond or whatever. I am not trying to copy your quirk, Shinso. Not right now, but if you ever want to know what it feels like to be under it, you just need to ask, Monoma said. No, thank you, Shinso replied. The other loud blonde finally got up from the ground and thought that it was a good idea to throw himself sideways onto Shinso's lab, which ended in him being pushed to the floor for the second time in then minutes. Shinso took every nice he ever said about them back. They were just FNG annoying and he didn't want them to make his life any worse. Shinso sighed, leaning back against the couch and placing his hands over his face. Why did he get two stupid, loud, blonde, annoying idiots? Just one of them would have been too much already. He didn't hate them, but he didn't like them either. They just destroyed his dream of becoming a hero, the only dream he ever had. Why the hell wasn't he mad? Those stupid strings. How could no one else see that the only thing they did was ruin lives? It's pretty late already, shouldn't you two go home soon? We don't want your parents to worry about you, his foster father said. Monoma and Kaminari looked at each other, and it didn't look like anyone was about to get choked to death, and they agreed with that. Denki even hugged him before he left the house through the front door, and it seemed like a certain teenager with a copy quirk wanted to do the same thing but decided against it as soon as he saw Shinso's glare. The guy still blew him a kiss before the door shut close. Shinso tried to pry the muzzle off his face as soon as his parents had locked him in his room, though calling something the size of a broom closet a room was maybe a bit of an exaggeration. The only light would come from the tiny window that was only just big enough that he could climb out of it if he needed to, but it was dark now because it was night. So, he still sat there in nearly complete darkness. He still remembered what people had told them because of his quirk, the fact that he had two soulmates, the fact that his mother had died minutes after he had been born. Well, people found a lot of reasons to hate him, quite easily, and he had never been with people he didn't use them to put him down even more. A villain's quirk will destroy the future of two people because of fate, killed his own mother, will die very young hopefully before he can become a villain. He heard all of this so much that it barely got to him anymore, but something it still hurt. Shinso sat down on the floor, pulled his legs closer to his chest and placed his head on his knees. It wasn't likely that he was able to sleep toning. The one thing Shoyuta wanted to do after a long day of work was go home, relax, maybe play a bit with his cats and spend time with his soulmate. Not that Shoyuta would be openly affectionate towards anyone, but Hisashi was extremely smart and at the same time very loud, and the latter was slightly annoying most of the time. He was laying on their sofa and none of his cats was destroying anything right now, and Hisashi was doing something in the kitchen. He heard the blonde steps a few moments later and he felt the couch dip a bit beside him. Shoyuta sighed and pulled the other man closer to him. If any of his students found out about this, they would be expelled immediately. The sports festival had been something. A student from Gen E could have potentially won if he wouldn't have found his soulmates on this exact day. Shoyuta wasn't per se mad about it, but why was something with a brainwashing quirk in general studies not in 1A or 1B? Such powerful quirks were incredibly rare, and letting something like this go to waste just because of a goddamn entrance exam that wasn't fair in the slightest was just stupid. Hitoshi Shinso, he had asked for his student file and Shoyuta didn't course very often, but the stupid sheet that was in there from mostly middle school was just utter bullshit. So many complaints from people that just claimed he had made them do something, none of them were believable. No one would use such a quirk like that, and Shinso didn't seem stupid enough to even think about doing most of the things. But now was not the right time to think about this. Rough day? Hisashi asked. He got a groan as an answer, and Shoyuta wrapped his arms around the blonde's torso. Hisashi was the greatest thing that had ever happened to him. He was a bit like a sun, always shining and always there to catch him when something happened. Shoyuta nearly purred as soft fingers began to comb through his hair. He was at peace. This was what heaven must feel like. Shoyuta, what did you do to our string? It took him a moment to register that it was a question and that the question was directed at him. Oh yes, he had played around with it a bit and now it may be loosely wrapped around his whole torso and arms. It felt good, it felt safe, and Hisashi seemed to be more amused about it than angry. I'm tried, sleep now, Shoyuta answered. Present Mike giggled at that, just hugged him back. Hisashi's hair was down, hung over his shoulders, and he was wearing a pair of normal glasses. They had met each other at UA in their first year, and let's just say that Shoyuta hadn't been very thrilled about it, but in the end, they had shared a pair of headphones and listened to music in silence for a few hours, and Hisashi had bought him his first cat. Then someone dared to ring the doorbell. If there was an incident, someone would have called him, and none of the two had ordered something in the last week, so no one should need to speak with them in person. Shoyuta just pressed his head into a pillow and tried to ignore the person that didn't look like they wanted to give up very soon. I'll get the door, be back in a minute, Hisashi said, and then he was gone. This had been supposed to be their afternoon and evening, no annoying students, no other humans, just a bit of peace for both of them, but someone just destroyed it. Little listeners, it's a surprise to see you here. Come in, do you want a cup of tea or, well, we only have tea, coffee and water, he heard the blonde speak. How did any of his students even found out where he lived? He was supposed to only deal with them at UA, not that he didn't care for them, but they seemed to love getting into trouble. Shoyuta threw the pillow off the couch and sat back up. Midoriya and Bakugo and the two weren't yelling each other. Today was the day of weird wonders happening. What are you two doing here? Shoyuta asked. We don't want anything to drink. Bakugo answered Hisashi's question. I have a hypothetical question. If we would kill a pro hero, let's just say for Endeavor only, for example, how would you get away with that? Midoriya said. What the F were these two planning? It was way too late for any of this. Shoyuta rubbed his fingers over his eyes and sighed loudly. Why do the two of you want to kill Endeavor? Shoyuta asked. Because that was the most pressing question at hand. He himself didn't like the number 2 hero, but he also wouldn't want him dead. But there would need to be a reason for two of students to do so. Well, kidnapping Shudo is also a possibility, but we couldn't warn him beforehand and he would probably panic, Midoriya explained. That was not an explanation, and the two of them didn't look like they were lovesick. Then they would be, at least in the beginning, just trying to get rid of each other. They wouldn't come to him if that would be the case. It was too late for this. Endeavor is a FING abuser and we want to get Shudo out of there as soon as possible, and Endeavor won't let us do that. His oldest brother is dead and he has a scar because his father abused his mother too. This family isn't normal in any way. I mean, my mom is a hag, but Endeavor needs to be away from them and they need some serious help, definitely therapy, Bakugo yelled. Do you have any proof? Shoyuta asked. He believed them. He didn't know why, but he knew them well enough to know that they wouldn't lie about that. But the police would need proof. No, well, Shudo told me a big part of it in the sports festival. That's also why he doesn't really use his left side that much. Doesn't use it much? That extra would have gotten first place if he had. Bakugo interrupted him. Great, it meant that no one had any proof at all, which meant that Shoyuta couldn't really help them. He wanted to, but without any proof the police wouldn't investigate, and even if they had some, it was very likely that Endeavor would shut the investigation down before anything could be done about it. Wait a second, Shoyuta knew that his students had been at the hospital, and he knew that someone had bribed his doctor, and what if it had been Endeavor? Shoyuta was going to look at a few medical files in the next few days and contact a specialist. But even if he found something, it would take time to figure out what the best course of action would be. Just don't do anything stupid, you two, and if you do, just make sure that no one gets hurt, Shoyuta said. He knew that they would do something about it, and he could only hope that they weren't stupid about it. Thank you, Sensei, Midoriya replied. He heard him mutter something about calling his father as the two left. But at least this was dealt with, and he hoped that nothing would happen in the next 2 days because the press was already on his nerves. He had been relaxing for a minute at most before the doorbell rang again. Had one of his students forget something? No, they hadn't, because he was facing Kaminari and Minoma as he opened the door. Mike needed to keep one of their cats occupied. How had so many people acquired his address in one single day? "Let me guess, this is about Shinso, right?" he asked. "Yes, where do you know that from, sensei?" Kaminari replied. "Doesn't matter, I am not going to invite the two of you in, so make this fast." Shoyuta wasn't Mike, and he was on top of all of this goddamn tired. Shinsu's foster parents are abusive. I copied a mind-reading quirk on the way here and read their minds. They put a muzzle on him because they think that he is dangerous and lock him away for days without giving him food and water, and your student didn't even notice anything. I saw the muzzle before that woman hit it. I didn't want to go to you for help, but that class 1A idiot thought that it was a good idea. That's why we are here. I don't plan to commit a crime, but someone needs to get him out of here, Minoma said. Shoyuta didn't like that kid, but he didn't even mention the clearly unauthorized quirk use there because he didn't care. You said foster parents, right? You know what would happen if UA pressed charges against them. He would be put somewhere else, and he most likely won't be able to go to school here anymore. This is rather risky. But I agree that it cannot go on like this, Shoyuta spoke back. That problem wouldn't be there with Todoroki because the dual quirk user had family he could live with, but Shinso was basically on orphan, or at least couldn't go back to his parents for some reason. The only way to make sure that Shinso could get out of there and still attend UA would be if someone adopted him, hopefully someone that actually cared about the kid. But he knew no family that would take a child with a brainwashing quirk, and Shoyuta knew that it wasn't fair, but he couldn't do much against it. Maybe Shinsu's quirk had also been the reason that he even was in the foster child system. But it was clear that the kid needed help that no one in the system would give him. The dorms, on the other hand, were already being planned, but it would take months for them to be finished, and he couldn't wait that long in both of those cases of abuse. Shoyuta could read people, and it didn't seem like none of them were lying about any of this, which didn't make it any better. You know what Todoroki did? He asked if Shinso was your secret love child. Well, he asked Izuku the same about All Might. What Denki said had nothing to do with any of this, and Shoyuta tried to forget it only a second later, but wait. He had no secret love child. Shoyuta had met his soulmate in high school, and both of them were male, so it wasn't even a possibility. But they were married soulmates, had a monthly income, were both teachers, owned an apartment big enough for at least 3 people, and were an underground and a pro hero. Shoyuta did like the kid, and Hisashi had been right when he had said that Shinso reminded him a lot of a younger Shoyuta, but he had only ever thought about training the brainwasher. This could also backfire really fast because he had no idea on how to raise a child. He could barely stop his cats from ripping the apartment apart. Okay, it wasn't that bad, but still this could end in a catastrophe. But hey, most of his class was that already on its own, so what was the worst that could happen? Oh, and it would probably be a traumatized teen on top of that. Good, I'll deal with this. You two go back home because it is already way past 10 p.m. and there is school tomorrow. With that, he slammed the door close. Shoyuta walked back into the living room. Well, he did take a short trip to the kitchen on the way there, and took a sip of his coffee. Hisashi was sitting on the couch and still petting one of their cats. Hisashi, we are going to adopt again, and it is not a cat this time. You can't just storm into my home like this, you have no permission to do so. Shoyuta was just a tiny bit away from punching the man and his wife in the face. They would have deserved it. I actually can. These papers here say that you are being charged for child abuse and child neglect in multiple cases, and this one says that the kids here will be moved away immediately. I hope you will never be allowed near children again. Now here is Hitoshi Shinso. Shoyuta was more than just angry. Those people dared to hurt children, little kids that had never had anything bad in their lives. Even if they had, they were children. Nothing could justify this. So, the brainwasher finally did something. At least society is rid of him now. That someone with that quirk believed that he could be a hero, totally delusional. We know what his father did with the same kind of quirk, killed an innocent man and raped his soulmate. What did the brat do? Forced someone to steal or RP another human. At his old home he made one of the kids there jump off the roof. Someone saw it. He was only 12 back then, so no one did anything about it. They also said they couldn't really prove it. A joke they just didn't want to admit that being a villain has something to do with your quirk and your genetics. If I would make the rules all kids of villains or people with evil quirks would be locked up from the very start, society would be so much safer and you as a hero should really be able to understand dash. The man wasn't able to finish his sentence because Shoyuta picked him up by the throat and slammed him into the next wall. Was this unnecessary violence? Maybe. The man was trying to use his quirk but for some reason it didn't work. What could that be? Shuta's hair was flowing around his head and her eyes were glowing red, so it shouldn't be that hard to guess. You are a disgusting human being. Shinso is just a child that never hurt anyone. I looked into his records. He tried to save the kid, but his question wasn't answered. He wouldn't want someone to kill themselves just because they were quirkless. He later said that he was jealous of them, jealous of someone who was quirkless because he had a villain's quirk. The kid that killed themselves was probably jealous of him because at least he had a quirk, even it was a bad one. The whole situation was effed up and none of it had been Shinso's fault. Now where is my son? The underground hero hissed. He isn't your son. His father is in prison and his mother is dead, the man replied. Shoyuta dropped him to floor and went through the stack of papers he was holding. Those seem to say otherwise. He is my son by law and keeping me from knowing where he is just another illegal act that can be added to your list of charges, the hero said. He was holding the adoption papers in his hands. How had he gotten this through the system so fast? Simple. It was very impressive when two heroes, one of them a well-known pro, show up to adopt a child. The thing was that Hisashi hadn't even tried to argue against it. He had just been okay with it after Shoyuta had explained the situation. And if anyone ever dared to call his husband a stupid loud blonde again, Shoyuta was going to commit a violent crime because Hisashi was everything but stupid. You don't know what you are taking in. The child is a monster, a beast. He could make you do whatever he wants. He could make you kill people, for God's sake. He needs to be kept from speaking. He is dangerous, the man's wife said. Did Shoyuta punch a woman in the face after that? Yes. Did he feel bad about it? Not in any way. I won't ask again. Where is Hitoshi Shinso? Shoyuta questioned. They didn't answer him and he couldn't make them talk because the police finally arrived to arrest them, and Shoyuta feared that he needed to turn the whole house upside down to find him. The policemen were also checking up on the other 5 kids that had lived in the house. An ambulance was also there just to be safe, but the kids seemed to be mostly fine. All of them were younger than Shinso and Mike was also trying to cheer them up a bit. Shoyuta was about to go back into the house as he felt a tug on his breathed leg. He looked down. A child was looking up at him. Probably around 5 years old, and she handed him something, pointed upwards and then vanished on the spot and returned to the other kids. A teleportation quirk. Those were pretty rare actually. Shoyuta looked at the key that was now in his hands. She had probably stolen it from one of the 2 adults. It looked like a normal room key. He knew what she had meant. Shoyuta walked through the front door and straight up the stairs. The building only had 2 stories and they should be checking out the building every minute, but he couldn't wait that long. The floor was old and it looked like water had gotten into some of the walls. Children shouldn't live in here. No one should actually live in here. The rooms that he stumbled upon didn't look safe at all. The window in one of them was just an open hole in the wall. These people should have been stopped long ago. The last door, he hadn't even noticed it was one at first. It looked more like there was just an open closet in the wall, was locked. Shoyuta put the key into the keyhole and tried to turn it. It worked and the door opened. There was no light coming from the room and he pushed the door open as wide as possible before he stepped inside and turned a flashlight that he was normally just carrying around on. This shouldn't be described as a room. There were pieces missing from the tapestry that had been stuck to the walls at some point and there was not one single lamp in it. The window was a joke. The only furniture in the room was a mattress and an old dresser that looked like it was falling apart at any second. But the worst thing that he saw was Shinso, standing in a corner of the room and pressing an arm over his hands to shield his eyes from the light. Someone had put a muzzle onto a child. Shinso blinked a few times before he seemed to register who the man in front of him even was. The teenager just pressed himself further into the wall. Was he scared of Shoyuta? What? Now wasn't the right moment to think about that. Shin, I am here to help you. You don't need to be scared of me. Hisashi was so much better at this. It seemed like the teenager wanted to say something, but whatever it was stopped by the muzzle that was still covering the lower half of his face. Shoyuta took a step towards him, then another one and another one. He wasn't walking fast, but he knew that they didn't endless time either. He was standing right in front of Shinso, and yes, maybe now that he thought about it, he understood why one of his students had thought that they were somehow related, but he knew for a fact that they weren't. "I am going to take the muzzle off, okay?" Shoyuta asked. He didn't want to startle the kid. Shinso would definitely need some serious help after this, but that was an issue for later too. At least the muzzle didn't have a lock, but the mechanism was still made in a way that made it inaccessible from the front. So Shinso couldn't have taken it off himself. Not that this was any surprise after what he had heard a certain garbage human say a few minutes ago. Shoyuta carefully took the muzzle off after he had loosened it a bit and just dropped it onto the floor. Shinso had marks on his cheeks and close to his lips. These BSs hadn't even bothered to find a muzzle that fit. Even criminals were treated better than that. He would be disgusted even more if that had still been possible in the first place. "Can you pack your stuff? We are leaving," Shoyuta said. He wasn't good at sounding as calm as he wanted to look. Maybe this had been a mistake. But Shinso needed help, and it wasn't like none of them had thought about adopting a kid before. They just hadn't expected it to be teenager. The kid didn't even question anything and just began to pack the stuff that had been in the dresser into a worn-out duffel bag. The school and sport uniform went also into, and something that looked a lot like a picture that had been folded together. They would also need to buy more clothes soon. How had no one noticed that something had been off here? Shoyuta was also going to file a complaint against a lot of other people, and maybe someone would say that he was overreacting, but he wasn't. Shinso closed and shouldered the bag. He walked over to the teacher and waited, his eyes focused on the floor. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. What in the name of whatever humans believed in was that? Why was he apologizing for? Shoyuta was baffled, but he had seen cases of abuse before, and still this seemed so different than the Shinso he had seen at the sports festival. It was sad in a way. "You have nothing to be sorry for, kid," Shoyuta said. Shinso didn't reply. The teen just walked past him and into the hallway and ran down the stairs. This was going to take a lot of work. He just hoped that Shinso liked cats. That would make it a bit easier. "You could have just let me go with the others. You don't need to drop me off at the orphanage by yourself." The "not that I am going to stay there for long" was left unsaid. Shinso was sitting in the back of the car. Mike was driving, but the music that was blasting through the speakers was at a tolerable volume. "You are not going to an orphanage or another foster home," Shoyuta told him. But Shinso seemed to get that the wrong way, because the teen bit his lip and turned around to stare out of the window. "Why did you even take the muzzle off when you were going to lock me up either way?" the teen asked. Then his expression changed to that of someone who had just noticed that they had done something terrible, and he slapped a hand over his mouth. "No one is going to lock you up, listener. You didn't even do anything," Mike yelled. But Shinso looked like he was trying to say something, but the words didn't leave his mouth. "Oh, it is better if Sho explains it. By the way, do you like cats, Shinso?" Hisashi asked. "Yes," the teen answered. "I am sure they'll like you too. All of them are such sweethearts." Shoyuta always had a hand for cats, seemed to like them more than humans, but that's my soulmate. Eraserhead rolled his eyes. Yes, just confused the teen even more. Mike the kid doesn't know what was going on in the first place. Shinsu's eyebrows were drawn together and he was tipping his fingers against one of the seats. The teen needed an explanation right now, or otherwise this wasn't going to end well. "To explain why you won't have to go back, we simply adopted you." "Is everything fine, Shinso?" Present Mike asked. No, he wasn't. The teen was everything but fine. At the moment nothing was even remotely okay. No one would adopt someone like him without having an ulterior motive. There wasn't a single person that wanted a child with a villain's quirk. Hitoshi wasn't stupid. He wasn't hoping for something that was impossible. But the teen just nodded at the man anyways and continued to press his fingernails into his other arm. He didn't know what those two heroes wanted from him, but he wasn't going to brainwash a person just because someone ordered him to do so. As far as he knew, the men that he was living with for now had 4 cats, a black one, a white one, a gray one, and one that had black and brown spots on white fur. Hitoshi hadn't asked for the names of the pets yet. He didn't think that he was going to ask in the foreseeable future anyway. The guest room looks still pretty boring, so if you want anything to decorate it with, you just need to ask little listener, the blonde said. "Don't overwhelm him, Zashi," Eraserhead interrupted. It was pretty easy to figure out that the two were soulmates. There were other things to worry about though. He didn't really know what they were like. They were heroes, yes, but that didn't automatically make them good people. Not all heroes were as nice as they claimed to be. But walking around killing them wasn't an answer. Hitoshi had heard of the hero killer, everyone had. Stain had a few points, but what he was doing was still far from right. The Hero Corps students were going through their internships right now. Hitoshi hoped that none of them would get into too much trouble or seriously hurt. Deep down he may wish that one of them got expelled, but that wouldn't guarantee that he would be the one getting into class 1A or 1B. Others wished for that too, but they didn't go through all the shit that he went through. They didn't deserve to be a hero as much as he did. But those others just had better quirks, more useful quirks, deemed a better fit. Quirks that were just better suited for being a hero. He didn't have any issue with those people personally, but society could go and F itself. The system was utter bullshit. The system was flawed, but the only person Hitoshi could do something for was he himself. No one else would help him, no matter what his soulmates had tried to make him believe. Shinso, I read through your files and there was a certain piece of information missing. Your mother is dead, that was very clear, but the only information about your biological father is that he is in prison, but not the reason for his permanent stay there. Your later foster father said some bad things about him, but I don't know if those accusations are actually true, the homeroom teacher of Class 1A said. Hitoshi knew that the question would be coming. It always was, he just hoped that he would have a bit more time to prepare himself on how to answer. Probably everything he told you was true, there was nothing good about that man. The teen stopped there. We can talk about that later, little listener. Now why don't we actually introduce him to our cats properly? Show, the blonde yelled. Eraserhead sighed but then agreed, like trying to argue with present Mike wasn't even remotely possible, but he also didn't really seem to mind it that much. As far as Hitoshi was able to observe the situation. These two were kind of weird, but not in a bad way. He couldn't explain it. It would probably be good for him to focus onto something else right now. You're right, Hizashi. In less than a minute the teen had his arms full of four boundless of fur and cuteness. Those are Yuki, Yami, Yoru and Yoke, and yes, we know that we aren't very good at naming things, but Shoyuta said that it might have something to it if all their names started out the same. He was right. Wait a second, why had they named their black cat Yuki? He was not fine with it at first, but I convinced him in the end, otherwise it would probably have taken years to even come up with a single name. You know, you could convince me to literally go to the end of the world for you. Show. The blonde wrapped his arms around the other man and put his head between Eraserhead's shoulder and neck. Zashi, not in front of the kid, the underground hero growled. He is old enough to not be scarred by cuddles, no one gets scarred by those. What if you show him his new room while I make some food? What do you two think about soba? The blonde asked. Zashi, did you really ask one of my students for a recipe? Yes. Todoroki-kun was very happy to help, though he was dragged away by his soulmates for some soul bonding a bit later. I think someone might be plotting something in the background, but maybe that is just a feeling. They are planning something, I just don't know what exactly that something is. Maybe you can talk to them after the internships are over. But now I want you to show our kid where he's going to sleep from now on. You know that personal space is important. Don't call him that, Zashi, we don't know if he is fine with it. We can just ask, Shinso, are you fine with us calling you our son? Present Mike asked the teen. Hitoshi didn't know how to answer that. But it wasn't like his answers mattered to anyone, they were just like his questions, never replied to. Even if that wasn't how his quirk worked. This was just some stupid trick to make him trust them. He shrugged, nothing he said mattered either way. Just show me where I am supposed to sleep, Hitoshi snapped at them. The two adults looked at him. Shit, he messed up. His anger had gotten the better of him again. The first door to the right you see when you enter the hallway, Aizawa said calmly. As if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just yelled at them seconds ago. Hitoshi stood up as if something had just bitten him and walked to the room as fast as he could. He knew that he was being kind of an a-hole right now, but it wasn't like anyone actually cared about him. The room itself was pretty plain, but it was an actual room. His bag was still in the living room and he didn't dare to leave and try to get it right now. Which meant that he didn't have the picture of his mother with him, or a toothbrush or other clothes if he was honest. His phone, or what was left of his phone, was probably still in that hellhole, not that he had anyone's phone number. The teen sat down on the bed and let himself fall back onto the blanket and pillow. The last few days had certainly been something. He had met his soulmates not long ago. Neither of them seemed to be bad people, but he wasn't very sure if he should really trust them. He knew that they had helped him get out of that house, but people often had ulterior motives. He knew that he should try to sleep. There was school tomorrow, but it wasn't like he could even if he wanted to. Insomnia and all that. He didn't sleep that night. The dark rings under his eyes were probably way darker than yesterday, and he felt like he would fall over any second. He hadn't slept in days, but it was going to be okay. Present Mike had called him yesterday after he had finished cooking, but Hitoshi hadn't answered, so they had probably thought that he had already fallen asleep. The teen pushed the door handle down and went into the hallway. It wasn't even 6 a.m. yet, so the two heroes were most likely asleep. Hitoshi was just going to look for some coffee and maybe a few snacks. What he didn't expect was Eraserhead sitting on the couch watching TV and staring at the screen like someone had just tried to murder his soulmate. Hitoshi may have taken a peek to look at what exactly the man was watching. Stain had been stopped and 2 UA students had gotten themselves into trouble again and were at the hospital right now. 3 students from 1A. "Why are you awake so soon?" Aizawa asked without even turning around. Did Hitoshi already mention the part of Underground Hero? The man was seemingly very good at knowing when someone was watching him. "I could ask the same," the teen replied. He fully stepped into the living room, nearly falling over one of the cats in the process. "Do you want some coffee? These troubled children are giving me another migraine." "I guess so." This wasn't weird, just not something Hitoshi was used to in any way. He stepped over the cat this time and poured himself coffee into one of the clean cups that had been next to the sink to dry off. He plummeted onto the couch next to the Underground Hero. The coffee was black, the blackest kind of black, and he hesitantly took a sip. At least the drink was still warm. "So, since the resident loud blonde is still asleep, do you feel ready to talk about your father now?" Maybe he should, maybe he really should. It wasn't like he didn't know what the reaction would be. It always was the same. You know that 80% of the known cases with a person having multiple soulmates don't really end well. You also know that doctors tend to call it a condition and that someone proved that it was a weird genetic mutation. Most likely caused by the appearance of quirks, because there are no reported cases of someone having more than one string before they existed, but I would also like to add that no one was able to even see the strings before quirks appeared. Probably have always been there, people just didn't notice it before. There is also no known case of a quirkless person having multiple soulmates. So, people treat it like a condition in most cases or ask why the person can't just choose one. That's not how it works. There is some reason the universe or whatever thought that exactly this person was perfect for you. You cannot cut a string, it only snaps if someone it is connected to dies. My mom also had 2 soulmates. In the beginning everything started out well, but you know my dad became lovesick. I think it's too nice to describe what exactly happened. He killed my mother's other soulmate and her parents, then comforted her through her mourning and told her that the police would soon figure out who it had been. But she wasn't stupid. She figured out that it had been him pretty fast, and he used his quirk on her, for weeks if not months. The police couldn't tell me the exact time span. He did things to her, and let's just say if he didn't, I wouldn't be here. My mom died minutes after I was born. If it had been at a hospital or some normal place, she would probably still be alive. Until 5 years ago they forced me to visit him in prison because our quirks are pretty similar or something like that. They aren't that similar. I don't want to talk about it anymore. He bit the inside of his cheek and down the rest of the coffee in one go. Eraserhead mumbled something incomprehensible and picked up one of the cats that was seemingly trying to get onto the couch and sat it down on the teen's lap. Hitoshi began to pet it instinctively. "Cats are better at this than humans," the teacher stated. I can fully agree with this statement.